Our framers had taken interest in the American Revolution. They are taking interest in the American Declaration of Independence. They have crafted a document, and that document was being what? Subjugated. That document was being denigrated, and that document was not being used. So when I say to you, you need a multi-party democracy, when I say to you that you need economic pluralism, you need political pluralism, I'm saying that because I'm a product of a society that gives me that ability to do that. So when I come to Liberia, protests and marches are something that should be rudimentary, and it should not be a big deal. So if you have lived according to your constitution for the 130 years of their existence, and you have followed the American democracy, the flag that looked like the United States, okay, and you had a motto that said, on your money in God we trust, and you said that the law of liberty brought us here, then you should not be denying people liberty to march in the streets peacefully and consult upon the common good and get a redress of grievances. You should not stop the people from doing that. But if you do that, then you are not democratic. And then when you send somebody to New York to say, St. Jackson would big your man, you know, put the president knee up, that we don't buy out. And I was saying, agree with all due respect to you, go and tell your boss that the struggle continues.
You also said that upon the advice of your mother on April 1911, said, before your departure, did you share this information with your colleagues?
Not really. It wouldn't have made a difference. They were my colleagues. I made a decision based upon the leadership of the different. Don't forget, power was an organization, and it had a central committee, and it had structure. The decision had been made. I couldn't change their minds. It was not my duty to change their mind, and I didn't want to change their minds because I felt they had a right to demonstrate. But my mother said, my son, don't be here. So my mother didn't have any information on what's going to happen, but my mother had an intuition that it was mother's son, just get out of here. Because you see, I told you, I have been in the country less than 2 weeks, and I was working for the government. So there was a dilemma. Okay, a dilemma that I faced personally in terms of my role, in terms of my public role. So what I did was, there was a diminution of my role, and I pulled back a little bit, but I supported the demonstration, and I went to Liberia, and that may have saved my life.
It is said that people united in good faith stand up together and fall together. Now, on the eve of an event that all of you have put effort into it, and you as a founding chairman emeritus, and also as one of the brains behind the formation, the objective, the scope of the entity. How do you look at yourself?
If you want me to admit that I was cowardly, but my mother was scared. She said, leave town, and I listened to my mother. Look, she could form a claim, understand the objective realities of that time. If I had even stayed in Monrovia, I was not going to go to Mars, because I told you that I could not compromise my role as Deputy Controller of Cash Business Relations at the Ministry of Finance with a show of public displeasure of the government policy. There was a dichotomy in that, but they knew where I stood, because guess what? I went to power meetings. I talked to power people. Power people were my friends. And I continue to be a strong member of the organization. And it's a good thing that I continue to show that, because guess what? My credibility would have been at stake. Then I come to Liberia and decided that I was no longer a member of the opposition, as other people did when they came to Liberia. whose names I will not name, but with the opposition in America, they come to Liberia, they're no longer opposition. And I didn't want to be one of those. That's why I stuck to my guns, believed in the movement, but in terms of my physical participation, my mother, and peace be to my ashes, she said, "You do that, mommy, so that you," and I left. And that was a great advice because I could have been dead.
He said that one of the problems he had in Liberia in the precipitation is that people, a small group of people who want to be national resources of this country. And the basic is to put the resources in the hands of the people. You as economists, how do you go about doing that? Putting the apple at the end of every morning and give to every individual, or which way?
Thank you very much. I'm glad you asked that question, and it gives me an opportunity to expand on some of the things I've learned. Thank you very much. We have a democracy of competing interests, and we have a pluralistic democracy now with political parties. The ascent to power means you got political power, and you control the public budget or public finances. It means that you have an opportunity to use the fiscal imperatives to prime the economy. It means that you can determine the flow of money into sectors by the purchasing power. The Liberian government has $299 million to spend. Now, does it make sense to spend most of that money on capital items, on abroad? Or do we try to spend most of that money on the burgeoning industry? Let me give you an example. There is no reason in the world, shape or form like comment, when a government, including the one I serve, to buy furniture that was made in another country. It's permanent, it's a disgrace, and it makes us appear stupid. We have 40% of the forest in the Upper Guinea region. We can have the best food processing industry in this country, but yet we buy furniture from Jimba, we buy furniture from Shane, and we are not building up a local furniture industry. Why couldn't my government that I serve, or this government for that matter, say that we will not buy furniture from abroad, and in 5 to 10 years develop a furniture industry that will be ready for export? That's fiscal imperatives. That would be what empowering Liberians instead of empowering Chinese who make the furniture and foreigners who sell them to us. That's one way. Using fiscal imperatives. We can do that with almost anything except the goods and services that cannot be provided here. The automobiles, for example. No, they can be. So, but the things that can be bought here, the things that can be made here, the brain powers that we have here, the government should use the $300 million to empower Liberian businesses. That's one way. The second way, boosting domestic entrepreneurship. What is that? What am I talking about? Liberian businesses. There's a total foreign domination of businesses in this country. If you would look at your GDP, I would submit to you that more than half of the GDP is by foreign nationals. And if you look at your national income, say about 90% of your national income goes to foreign. There is something in economics called marketing inefficiency. What you're doing is you are bringing in foreign goods from abroad, you bring them to Liberia by foreigners, you're using the national income to purchase these goods and services, and what they do is they repatriate the profits abroad. So that money is not turning over in this economy. So as a result, you're not creating wealth in Liberian hands, you're creating wealth in foreign hands. And if you continue to create wealth in foreign hands, you will have a very angry population. So the first thing the government needs to do is to boost domestic entrepreneurship by giving us access to training. Let me give you an example. You have your importation, your wholesale, your retail in the hands largely of Lebanese. What stops you from developing a cadre of young Liberian entrepreneurs, give them access to trade finance so they can bring in the commodities that are brought in by foreigners by facilitating that process? And that process is called trade finance. Most of the trade finance is not done by Liberian banks for these letters of credit that were supposed to be brought here because the banks don't have the capacity. So what is happening, Sheikh, if you listen to me, Brother Conan, is that the Lebanese businessmen primarily use something called confirming houses abroad to finance goods and services. If you notice, the hardest thing for a Liberian to do is to bring a shipment in this country over $100,000 because it's cash and carry. You got to go to Dubai, go to China, take your money. But there's a whole international system set up to finance goods and services. It's called letters of credit. And the international banks have a way of doing that between buyers and sellers. So if we put the importation of goods into the hands of Liberians, and we teach them the skills of wholesale, distribution, and retailing, we can say to the foreigners in this country, we want you out of the wholesale and retail market in 10 years. We don't need you there. We can say that. Got to teach the skills and put together the mechanism to make that happen. That's one way. The second way is by look at your possessions in this country. I explained that earlier. Go down to mind this. Bring small companies come here, they get a piece of paper, and they cash in that piece of paper by going abroad and raise capital on it. I can submit to you that you and I, we can write some of the best project proposal. We can go to our government and say, we need an oil block. Give me an oil block, Madam Sharif, and in my need, I will raise some money. And let me tell you what has happened. There's a company called Ranchers, a Nigerian company, that came here a few years ago to get an oil block. They have to pay for the geophysical interpretation. Guess what happened? Their check bounced. Okay? But eventually, they made it up and we gave them an oil block. Okay, now the company, 5 years ago, whose check bounced, 3 days ago, brought in ships to do 3D seismic work because what? Using our resources, they have gone to loop oil in Russia and have gotten them as strategic partners now, renters of multi-billion-dollar company, right on our doors, with an oil block that we gave them, right here in Liberia. Think about that. Now, they must be thinking there is something fundamental wrong with our brain cells. When we own the resources, and we give it to them, and they cash it in and we're poor. Why do you think, Albert Kafuma Kone, that every plane that's coming to Liberia now is full with people? They are coming to take away what is here. This is the new frontier. This is the gold rush. This is where the forest resources are. This is where the rainbow resources are. This is where the gold resources are. This is where the fisheries are. And this is where the most arable land to plant rice. So 10 miles from here, the city of Monrovia, instead of people begging on the streets of Monrovia, there should be 10-15 miles from here, planting edibles that they can come and sell to a virgin economy. That's how you build an economy. That's how you build a country. And we don't do that, we're doomed. So you ask me how to do that? That's how to do that. I was saying that's the government tax, why didn't do it? I don't know why we didn't do it. Which president do you know that have been president so far, and I don't know how Mr. Salih does it, that have very listened to sound economic and financial advice from competent people? It's all about self-interest. You know that, and I know that. And I can almost guarantee you, a few years from now, some of the mistakes that are being made today will multiply, and we'll be talking about it more. But I don't know about these mistakes today. I want to speak to the historical record of why we are poor. Why we are poor today. Okay? And another thing, security. Here you have in the country, you fought a war, and you say you have over 150,000 ex-combatants. According to the UN own figures, 85% of those ex-combatants are drug addicts. Drug addicts. There's some substance abuse problem. And yet, we don't have one substance abuse clinic in Liberia. One substance abuse clinic in Liberia. All the time you see loading car, when they step up, they can't wear shoes, they will sell it. They're on a drug called 2G. And those are the ones in the night that grab the cars and they come after you and kill you at night. You haven't done anything to help them. You know why you haven't done anything to help them? Because they are terror people. They are simple, demonic. But if these were people that were not young peasant boys and girls that were conscripted in an army by people who may be sitting in positions of power today in this country, they would have done something about these young boys and girls who are addicted to 2G that was given to them during the war to put them into power. You can't have an economy if you don't solve the security situation of the country. So as long as you have 100,000 young men and women, 50,000 in Monrovia, addicted to an opiate called 2G, they will come to you, they will snatch your food, carry the street, they will go on home, they will cut you, they will kill you in the night, and that is what is happening. You need to solve that problem, Sheikh Omar. That's how you build an economy. And it's not happening. We need to happen. We need to talk about it. Security, and then a plan to empower Liberians to do something. Will bring about what? Equality in the distribution of income, and will produce a pluralistic society guided by democratic principles, and we can now build a society that we can compete in the 21st century global economy. If we don't do that, Sheikh Fumakone, we're going down the wrong way, and we are prone to another conflict. I guarantee you that.
Your statement of accounts in perspective. You made mention of two traits that in order to vote and on behalf of NPP-led government. One was to Mozambique. You did not say to us in your document that you were accused of taking money to go there, or you were giving money to go there. You said Monique Captain, who was then foreign minister, gave you 4,000 United States dollars to cover your trip. And we also said in the same topic that at a certain time you were accused of receiving $1 million from the Taylor government to go and perform what you call public relations for the government. You did not, even though you denied receiving the $1 million, you did not mention how much was really given. Is it an oversight or deliberate?
Well, I said that in my explanation, but I can guarantee you that the records are there, that I said when I was speaking that Charles Bright at that time was a minister, and I was in Accra, and they sent me $10,000 to go to London. And when Mr. Bright ever comes here, you can ask me how much money he gave me at that particular time. That he sent, because I wasn't here, so he sent the money, but I can't do it to get to me at that time, so it was $10,000.
I don't think you have an answer.
But you said, was it an oversight that everybody is documenting?
I asked you whether it was an oversight or it was a deliberate.
No, it was oversight, absolutely oversight. Absolutely. Oversight.
Mr. Witness, I want to say thank you for appearing before TRC, and I want you to know that when I got up to leave, it was for some reason, but I didn't have my radio, so I was still following you through. I want to thank you very much for coming with your experience, educational experience, and telling the Liberian people why they are poor. You said you were born 1954. I've known you since the 60s, I've known you since the 70s, the 80s, 90s, up until today. When I took my oath of office as Commissioner of the TRC on February 20, 2006, if you will recall, I put on a dark shades because if the people didn't know the reason why I put it on, I said there will be people who will be coming before me as Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who I've known since birth or my various activities. And before taking my seat on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I renounce my allegiance to all political parties I'm affiliated with, all groups, all political leaders, and even to my friends who are known. Because it's my integrity, my knowledge, and being long enough to know that's why the Liberian people recommended me. And that's why by sitting before a panel with the OAU, the EU, the UN, and other political parties, leaders who I've interacted with, and civil society group, I was chosen from among 100 and something. So it's in this light that I now must use my dark shades, because I don't see anyone, I only hear, and so happy go what I do according to my conscience. That's why I'm going to the TRC. I want to say thank you for giving your explanation on how, because we have so many versions and so many people claiming leadership and authority. So by coming forth and preparing a speech in writing, you have given your side of what it is. Thank you very much. The only question I have to ask you, do you confirm and affirm that you, Samuel, what are other name? Polypia Jackson, because you know someone came here and talked about how I think Frank talked or somebody could pronounce a name correctly, so I don't want to miss the name, so they could think maybe. Do you confirm and affirm that the name you call your name, that you were never a part of any of the warring factions in Liberia from when they started to 2003, the time frame for which we are to look through? Could you confirm and affirm on our also happy God the result of this is perjury under the law?
Are you done?
Yes.
But anyway, I'm glad you asked that question, because no one has ever asked me that question before. And there may have been some assumptions because I was close to people in leadership who have you. But I can tell you, not only upon the Bible, upon my mother's grave, I have never, ever been part of any faction in the Liberian civil conflict at all. Neither have I had any meeting where there were military matters discussed or matters that would lead to violence ever. And no one, I challenge anyone within my voice to say that I was a member of any faction, or they can produce any evidence, any communication, any membership roster, any time they met me. And I can tell anybody, I've never been to Banga since, what? No, recently I went to Banga, but I did not go to Banga until 2002. Charles Dante Taylor is a close friend of mine, and the first time I confirmed that it was indeed the man I knew to be Charles MacArthur Taylor, who was now Charles Dante Taylor, or Charles Taylor at that time, was the first time I saw him in his military uniform in Takata and on page 3 or 4 of the New York Times in 1990. That was the only time I knew there was a scene Taylor. Because Taylor, if you can remember, when we were younger, was a pretty boy. And he used to like to enjoy himself. So I could not believe that this same Charles Taylor that I knew would get and organize the force and be in a foxhole and be disciplined enough to do the things that was being described to him. Alhaji Kumar and myself went to school together, St. Patrick's, who's a point proceed. He cannot tell you that he and I ever met and anything to membership in the limo. Sekou Damante Kone, you heard me call him what? Barefoot Pestilence during the war, so I could not have been a member of the Lord movement. Modell, Edward Slanger, and other people, you know I was with Taylor as a minister of heaven. Therefore, categorically, starting from the Joint Forces for the Liberation of Liberia, the Liberian Revolution movement in 1985, I was not there, and I guarantee you, and I say to anyone with even a voice that has any evidence that I was part of any faction to come up or forever hold your peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Although our mandate says that we should look into the period power, investigate human rights violations, international human rights violations in myth and history about Liberia, the consequences of the events leading to the war, and so forth. There's a portion because you spoke and you went outside, so to speak, by talking about things that happened 2003 after our mandate to present. But there is a provision in our mandate that gives us the authority to make recommendations for institutional changes, institutional recommendations and for judiciary, governance, education. So we can look within under that era and we take into consideration some of the statements you made in terms of the economics, as well as to show Liberians how Liberians won't have Liberians, and they have not learned the Liberian anthem enough to know that in union strong, success is sure, and that when it's time to help a Liberian, they will bring them down, and foreigners can come together, brothers can come together when Liberian brothers can see the need for Liberians to benefit. So take that into consideration for recommendation for institutional changes. Said at one point, an accident of history. We are sitting here, will have to write about the reality of our history, the myth, and what really happened. Thank you for participating to the process and for serving your country, because you show that you came from somewhere, your power was just a book, and you left these shows at 17 years old. And for the people to know when you send your children at 17 years from here, and when they come back, what they expect and what role they will play. History will be your judge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson, contributing to this unique process. And before I begin, I would like to say sorry to you for the experiences you went through at the Peace Party.
Thank you very much.
You said in your testimony that the demonstration was not about rights, but it was about rights. And then you look at our history, and you also mentioned that it would be unfair most often to begin with 1979, forgetting about the genesis, what happened before 1979. We have heard a lot. New position in that you've been able to work in Togo government for some time. You worked in the Doe government for 11 months. You also worked in the Taylor government. The TRC is in power to actually look at human rights violation that occurred in the course of our conflict. I would like for you to please help us in terms of the three governments that you serve. What were the record in terms of right protection? What violation that people experience during this time? What can we actually do?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Sheila. I indicated to you in my presentation that it would be a miscarriage of justice historically if I just started in 1979. If I did, I would have to start on March 31st, 1979 when I arrived in Liberia. But you have to understand my role in the formation of the movement and where I stood. That's the reason why I had to go back into my own genealogy, my own history, and come up. The government I served in terms of the human rights violations, I think we would have to look at it in terms of events, circumstance, and opportunity. If you look at the two-party government in terms of proportionality, I think the two-party government disproportionately dealt with its critics, and there should be some apportionment of blame. The Doe government, of course, received the excesses, the inhumanity that went with the Doe government. And also you saw the excesses of the Taylor government in terms of the humanity. Now, I'm not going to stay here and try to dissect in terms of moral relativity whether Togo was a better respecter of human rights than Doe, and Doe was a better human rights respect human rights than Taylor. If I did that, what I would be doing, I would be doing an injustice to myself and to the history of this country. And the reason for that is, I told you in no uncertain terms that I was extremely close to Togo. Togo liked me. In fact, I'm going to confess today, presidents loved me. Up to this present one, they all like me. For some reason, I don't know. So they're all my friends. And I would also think that whoever is the current president of this country next, while I'm alive, more than likely be somebody I know because it's a small country. So it would be unfair for me to sit in this gathering today and try to do a matrix on the human rights, record of the three administrations I served. They will do no justice. But I'm sure you have the records and you will be making a report. You have the statements from witnesses. You will analyze them and you will be making the definitive historical account of atrocities that were committed, human rights violations, economic sabotage, and those kind of things. So for me, I would prefer not to get into the matrix of the civil rights or human rights record of the three leaders I served. I'll leave it to history to judge.
Thank you very much. Going back, looking at our history, in 1979, the young people came together in the USA and formed FARC. In 1990, because they felt that certain things were not going right in terms of governance. In 1990, if you look at the conflict, in as much as the young people are not responsible to purchase the gun and other things, but if you take a statistic, you know that majority of the people who fought this war was young people. And now you talk about the real life incidents, what's happening to the young people today. What can we do as a nation now to ensure that the young people will feel that they are part and parcel of this process, and so that we'll be able to avoid these things from happening?
One of the problems I have, and I will address the commissioner about what the audience, is the hypocrisy that has characterized the history of this country, especially the most recent history. There is no way a young boy from Arlington, Charles MacArthur, Charles Banker Taylor, would have put together a destructive force that culminated in the loss of so many lives. There are many actors who participated in the foundations of the National Patriotic Forces of Liberia, who funded him, who went around America, who raised money on the pretext that Samuel Doe was about to kill a lot of Congo people. And these people raised a lot of money. They raised the money, and they did not use their children to fight a war in Liberia. They used the children of farmers, of carpenters, and ordinary citizens as a cannon fodder in their ascent to leadership in this country. They today have forgotten that some of those kids were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, who are now past puberty, who are now childbearing age, and who are men and women, and who are not educated, and who are now victims of their ascent to power. It is my honest opinion that if we do not make a social contract with the children of war in this country, the young men and women who sometimes have to prostitute themselves to eat, go to the various entertainment places to feed their families, go to the different places to steal a cell phone, go to the different places to cut a copper wire and get electrocuted. These people are watching, and they will be the revolutionaries in a very short order. I am appealing to all of us, men and women, no matter who these boys are, no matter who trained them, no matter who gave them drugs, no matter who put arms and ammunition in their hands and turned them into terrible killing machines, we must redo that nonsense that was done, what we call the DDR program, because the DDR process is an abject and uncontrollable engine of failure that is running down the politics of this country right now. It has failed. It's a major failure. Mr. and Mrs. Commissioners, I can tell you that if we do not find the domestic resources to create substance abuse clinic in this country, to teach psychosocial skills, psychosocial intervention in the lives of the hundreds of thousands of people who fought this war, there will be another war. I guarantee you that. I guarantee you that. Because these people will be living on the margins of society. They will have no stake in society. They will have no empathy for those of us who appear successful and are in the mainstream of society. And we will be victimized because they were earlier victimized by men and women in their rise to power in this country. I guarantee you that. So, Madam Sila, I thank you for this question. That has to be the cornerstone of reconciliation going forward. It is not the fact that my parents died in 1990, but it's those young men and women whose future were taken away from them by men and women in a greed for naked power. And they're here pretending today that they are the Democrats and they brought in this new dispensation. I can tell you that if we do no justice to those thousands and hundreds of thousands of children whose future have been destroyed, we will have not begun the process of healing. And thank you for that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming to make a part of this over the years, coming to share your experience with us. I think like the chairman said, this will go along. Sometimes we must also rewrite our history, including all of the people. See how best we can understand the country. My question comes from the presentation you gave to us. The first one is the idea to form is on page 2 of the presentation. The idea to form the Progressive Alliance of Nigeria was an accumulation of many years and thought. Page 2,
I have a different format. I have it 14 and I have a double space. So yeah, okay. Okay, I got it. Okay, I did the form of the reservoir and it was a combination of many things. Go ahead.
yeah, so I wanted to know some of those many thoughts and then the information.
Okay. If you look at the historical events, we'll look at 1955. Okay, and if you look at the most recent of the events, you will look at the issue with the revelation with the jailing of the university students in 1973-74. And also you look at the Calvin Code incident, and you look at the Fountain incident, and you look at all of those things that... Yeah. Well, the reason was the apply that failed, if you remember. Okay? And then you look at the events, the historical events of that time, the plot that failed, the David Coleman incident, then you come to the Calvin Code incident at the University of Liberia, where he made 1969, I believe. Okay? Then, was that? Calvin Code, yeah, Calvin Code. Then we look at the Farmland incident, I believe, in 1967. Okay? Now, all of these events demonstrated beyond the shadow of a doubt that the True Wing Party was not willing to have democratic pluralism in Liberia, because every time anybody came up to form an opposition political party or had a different thought, like although the late Famulette was, don't forget, he was arrested for only reading a book. And I can tell you when I was growing up, there was a book written by Liberia called Zinzin Ho, which was a fictional account of contemporary Liberia in the 60s at that time, which was banned. You could not see the Zinzin Ho, you need to write that down, Liberia. And there were other books that were written by Gus Liberia, Evolution of Privilege, and then Marion Frankel, Class and Tribe in Monrovia. They demonstrated that there was something wrong. And even you go to some other books with Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. These were not popular books to be seen with in the time. So those thoughts that went into those books and the events from 1955 and part of 1955, the D2 and the rest of them, culminated into the formation of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, because we felt we had to go one more at the True Party in our lifetime to see whether there had been a transformation in the True Party and they were amenable to change. So we were testing the system. But I submitted to you, Madam Doko, that we did not know, and no one would have known, that the system was the house of cards. The True Party projected strength, but there was nothing there. It was a mirage. It didn't have the ability to retain itself in power by using the state apparatus. It couldn't do that, as we saw during the Rex riots in 1979. You saw what happened. In 1979, April 14, from what I gather, there was no government on that day. There was a vacuum. There was a security vacuum, there was a political vacuum, a social vacuum. So much so that we had to bring in troops from another country to do what? To restore the social peace. So how could a government that had been in power for 130 years with access to the resources of this country in the national budget not be able to put together a credible security apparatus to protect its institutions and to protect itself in power? So that was where I was coming from to say the events, it was now time, and we believe me, we came to vote the True Party of power. There was no love match between us and the True Party. And while they thought there was going to be some marriage of convenience, but it wasn't going to happen because that was not the goal. The goal of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia was very clear: political power. The goal of NOJA was inculcating things in the minds of young people and then to develop a character and eventually. But we were looking at a movement that would sweep us to power in the next election.
On the next page, page 3, I don't know your page there. Second paragraph, talks about making several observations to the government. Can you tell us some of those recommendations and observations that you made that were refused by the government?
Well, first, I think the most important observation recommendation that we needed a multi-party democracy, which was rejected on the end by the government. The second recommendation we gave was social and economic inclusion, which was not rejected, which was misunderstood. And some of the observations that were made continue to be relevant even today. And we talked about it already in terms of the economic inclusion, the disparity of income, okay, education, social welfare, all of these things that bring cohesion to society, and spending money and revenues, okay, in areas that can do a lot of good and provide social cohesion. These are all recommendations we made. These are recommendations And from the mindset of young people over 30 years back, some of them may not be relevant today, but I can tell you that they were very relevant in 1974 when we made these recommendations. And the recommendations were rejected on the other hand. We were saying, oh, these children from America, they know what they're doing. And that was the attitude. Because for a long time, I mean, there had not been a movement of that order that would be making those kind of recommendations and coming up openly and saying, we intend to challenge you at the polls. It had not been done for a long time.
So when that, those recommendations were rejected by Milton Reed, who came to talk to you on behalf of the government, what was your feeling that time for the Progressive Alliance of Liberia, and what decision did you make at that time?
Well, when Mr. Reeves came, the whole premise of his coming to New York, well, you know, they got some little children in New York, they're making plenty of noise there.
You understand that?
No, I'm saying that. So the premise, I'm giving the premise. So when he came, he talked down to us. So because he spoke down to us, there was no dialogue, there was a monologue. So when he left, it was like nothing, okay, but we just continue to do what we're doing anyway, and we'll continue to constructively engage the government, we'll continue to write, and we started a newspaper, even your called the Revolution. And the Revolution was the hottest cake in the country because if you remember in 1974, 73, there was a headline, Talbot Ames and Nobel Peace Prize. And the reason for that headline was that Mr. John Foster, the South African president, the architect of one of the most debilitating political systems in the world, apartheid, okay, that all these dogs were against black people, that had Nelson Mandela in jail, and they were breaking rocks in Robben Island, and Mr. Talbot decided to do what? Invite John Foster to Liberia. And what do you think would be the reaction of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia when Mr. John Foster comes to Liberia? And South Africa has been universally condemned as what? As not protecting the human rights and civil liberties of black people. And apartheid, as you know, being the most destructive political system of our time, and here was the president of a black African country who had been shepherding decolonialism and talking about neutrality and what have you, non-alignment, and hanging out with Sekou Touré and other Africans, and here he is going around and meeting with John Foster. So we continue to agitate. We continue to expose the government in newspaper articles. We continue to expose them in speeches. We continue to recruit. Because every time they made a mistake, we capitalize on the mistakes. That's politics. So that's what happened. So Bill Reeves' visit was a watershed. As far as I'm concerned, they didn't have, well, not a watershed, it was a non-event. So I only mention it to tell you about the historical reaction from Mr. Talbot, from the Formation of Power. That's why I mentioned it.
Did it not feel your determination?
Of course not. Of course not. Of course not.
On that same page, you have power was formed, was not formed to destabilize the government, but coming down, it was meant to provide an outlet for the frustration of Liberians who had seen social and democratic transformation around the world, yet continue to see the country wrapped up in ancient, destructive political traditions. A society as thus later known observed, ruled by secret societies, secret acts, and full families. My question there is ruled by secret societies. What were those secret societies that were ruling this country? Because we're looking into the history of this country and we would really like to know what happened at that time. The secret acts, the families that are living in this country.
I read Liberion's book a long time ago, and I can tell you what he said. He said Liberia was controlled by the Masonic craft and a poor society. He was very clear about that. The secret pact was what he said when there was a pact among the settlers that continued until into the 70s, remember the pioneers' children. So that was a secret pact. And in turn, remember the pioneers' children. That is a pact. And that is a secret pact. And that's what Nick and I was talking about. And then we talked about the 4 families. And I don't want to name any family, but you can read Gus Livinow's book and also look at Marion Frankel, Class and Tribe in Liberia, and it will show you the interconnectivity in terms of people with leadership and power and how they were connected to each other. So,
there were families in that book.
of course, absolutely. Family.
Why can you tell
Because I don't
our
know.
secret?
No, the reason why I want to do that is this is reconciliation. And there are people today who, and if you read the book, you can put that in your book, but you're not going to get the same text. And the reason is that once I said that, the controversy that will be out there in the papers the next day on those people's families is something that I don't want to put them under today. And you can understand that. Because the book is there, you can read the book. But now, I don't want to be the one to come here and to eliminate the 4 families I control Liberia in 1978 or 79. But I glossed over it. Yeah. Unless I'm forced to answer, I'm required by the code of law, I will not answer that question here because I think it doesn't promote reconciliation. I think it will tend to divide us. Yeah, promote the truth. But you can find the truth, but it's not going to come out of my mouth.
They also said that the next stage, which is before, he said that you tender your resignation as chairman of the Equal Alliance of Liberia. Who became the new chairman?
Marcus Matthew.
At the time that you were chairman, what was his role?
Matthew ran the newspaper, he was editor of the Revolution, that's what he did.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and also we have to full, yeah.
He was really the editor of it.
Yeah, in the States. And when I attended a resolution in 1978, January, then he became the chairman. Yeah. But he was only editor of the Revolution before 1978.
Page 5, we talk about the 1979 rights riot, and you talk about not compromising the government, because at that time we had already started working for it. But then this is an organization that you were founding chairman for in the States. An organization that you all formed, you all claim to support or supported. You all stood for their own thoughts and their own ideas. But yet and still, because you were working for the government at that time, you compromised. How can you reconcile?
I didn't understand the question. I compromised in how and you need to.
I'm not talking. I'm not saying anything. According to...
Yeah. Okay, I know what you're talking about now. You know, now, my role was very clear in who I was and what I represented. So whether I spoke in favor or against the demonstration didn't really matter because I was a strong member of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. And I believe in the rights of people to free speech, to assemble, to consult upon the government for a redress of grievances. But I'm looking at the practical matter at a particular time in history when I'm a civil servant working for this government within the African political context also. Okay? But because if I'm in New York City, I'm working for City Hall, I can take time off and go to a demonstration to ask the city of New York to divest its interest in companies doing business in South Africa. Or I can work for Chase Manhattan Bank, and I can go and ask to go demonstrate against Chase Manhattan Bank for Chase Manhattan to divest itself of its holdings in company to business in South Africa, which I did. But here in an African setting, I've only been here since March 31st. And I was going to the ministry every day at work, and there was a demonstration being planned. I could not bring myself to active participation. We had the numbers, so they didn't need me to demonstrate what I felt. There were enough people expressing moral outrage on my behalf. Pretty much the same what is happening in Liberia today. There are things I disagree with, but I don't go to the radio anymore because there are people who are more articulate than I am, who can say it better than I can. It's not that I agree with everything that's happening in Liberia, but I just choose not to say anything now because they're all younger, more energetic people who can do it better than I can. And the same thing in 1979. There was no reason for me to go out there and be propounding when Kyle owned the city of Monrovia at that time in terms of numbers. You could not go in any corner of this town without power members, without power leadership. We have built an organization with what? With headquarters and branches all across this town. The people of Newtown at that time were bottom with the market and put their laptop down for him to walk on. And when us we had this, all the young people put their laptop for him to walk on. So I didn't have to add to the debate. I didn't have to add to anything. Kyle was now de facto the opposition to the Truman Party. So I didn't have to say anything.
And so I accepted this job with the government, felt I would play a role.
No, I wanted to constructively engage the government. I told you, Tom and I had a good relationship. And I didn't look at this thing from the fact of animosity against the Truman Party, because politics is not a zero-sum game. You win some, you lose some. So there was nothing wrong with being a civil servant in the government that you wanted to kick after 2 or 3 years. Because I'm sure that there are many civil servants today in the government of Liberia that did not vote for Mr. Salif and who may not vote for her if she runs for another election or may vote against the Unity Party in a by-election. But it does not mean that they are not civil servants or they don't part of this bureaucracy. So you have to understand that they are different. Now, I can tell you something, I was very naive. Because the Liberia of 1979 was not the kind of Liberia where you can be a member of power and work for the government at the same time, as I formed later on for my detriment. But I naively believe that we could do that. And I was wrong. Very wrong.
Power was formed to bring about change through recommendations and debating issues of national concerns in non-violent way. For the West Riot, did you attend all of the meetings?
Not really.
In that time?
No, not really. And the reason why that was very practical, I worked from in the morning to 5, 6 o'clock. And after that, we passed the party headquarters, speak to blockers. But by that time, I'm sure, but in terms of the essential decisions I would be there, I was aware of it. But in terms of the tactical decisions, I was not involved in it. But
so you were engaged with them?
Of course, absolutely. And I was seen with them publicly, going to the office on a regular basis. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So from the moment that the announcement went out that the government was not going to stand for any demonstration, and that there was a standing order to shoot if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
You all were aware that there were going to be violence. And so my question is, for an organization that was formed on the basis of engaging the government, not violently, but through recommendations and through other ways of bringing about change. At that point in time, what was your advice to them? And how did you see their determination to continue?
I said that earlier, maybe you understand me. You could not tell people in the movement anywhere in the world, you couldn't say to Black Lancer, don't put solidarity members in the street because the Polish government on the Warsaw Pact will shoot you. You couldn't say that. You couldn't say to Martin Luther King, don't cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge because Mo Khan and his dog will attack you. You couldn't say to Nelson Mandela and the ZSPF movement that they should not go to Liberia, they will be captured. And therefore, you could not say because the government was going to shoot people that we should not at least make a stand for the government who have the state power. They should be standing down, they should be because the will of the people was against them.
So because of that?
Of course, you have to believe in something and you have to stand up there and accept the consequences. And historically, as you know, Madam Dolopo, every crisis in the world, political crisis, has been between two groups. You saw in Tiananmen Square when there was a lone man standing in front of a tank. It would have been easy to say, young man, get away from that tank. But he did it. He stood in front of that tank. Okay? And you could say to others in this country, why didn't you stop? But I can tell you, the burning desire to bring about social justice, sometimes you have to do what you have to do to test the system and bring about social transformation. That's exactly what we did.
And people will be happy to test that system.
Of course, and I paid the price too. I paid the price. Okay? And let me tell you something. We did not force anyone to go on the street. We didn't say, if you don't go on the street, we'll beat you. They had a choice. They had a choice. And they made the choice to get there. And we didn't go on the street. And let me just, we were assembling, even though I wasn't here. That has been the history of the Rhino Commission. That they were assembling at Power Headquarters when the police decided to fire the first volley and start this carnage of 1979. So we didn't force anyone to go on the street. And we didn't use anybody that can afford it. And if people went out there, they knew the risk, they weighed it, and they made a conscious decision to go out to demonstrate and accept the consequences. I want you to remember that. We didn't force anyone to go on the street.
You said after you were released from jail, your very family and friends who could not be able to speak to your wife came to visit that day and to applaud you as one of those brave.
After 1980.
Yeah. That not ever changed. And you yourself couldn't believe the deceit, dishonesty, and all of those things. And it had been ruling the country at that time. It still continues today, according to your statement. So can we say that the main problem in this country, instead of all of the other issues that we talk about, the social issues, people going hungry, people not having a job, which is a normal thing in any country that you can find around, can we say that lies, deceit, hypocrisy, all of these things are the root causes of problems in any country?
Avarice and greed. But then I told you about the economic determinism. If you don't have social justice, you don't have economic justice, because there's a dishonest thread in your political fabric, if there's a dishonest thread in the debate going in the society, and if you're greedy and you want to accrue onto yourself political power and use the political power to affect your economic and financial nets by giving privileges to your cronies, what you are doing, you are inevitably calling for another conflict. So yes, because people are hungry, because people are starving, because people don't have access to the desirables of the society. According to Robert Kilbert in the Anime theory, they will use non-orthodox means to receive the desirables of society, and that's the cause of conflict in most societies.
Equally so, people are sitting there to see people who are in power to stay on.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. On your economic page, which is page 10, so it's not part of the presentation, but during the explanation you talk about putting our country into the hands of foreigners when it comes to the economy and the money aspect. But yet still, at one point in time, you were able to negotiate after doing some research and knowing how much Liberia was worth. You were able to negotiate with a foreign person to come here and tap into that wealth. How can you reconcile this statement?
Very easily.
What?
I was coming as a Liberian active participant in the World Class Project. I was not fronting for a foreign organization. And I was bringing a world-class organization here with Liberian participation. Now, having foreign domination in the economy is not exclusion of foreign participation in the economy. Those are two separate things. What I push for is foreign participation and not foreign domination. And what is occurring and what occurred before is foreign domination. I'm saying to you, all of the major companies in this country that will be exploiting our resources, there is no significant Liberian participation in the equity in those companies. And as a result, Liberians will not ride the growth curve because this economy, if we do the right thing, there's going to be a geometrical ascent. There's going to be growth. But that growth curve is like a rocket ship, will lead many people down because in that rocket will only be foreigners and one or two Liberians.
And can we explain the Liberian participation of Liberia part of what you are bringing in?
But I have equity participation in the company. And what we were doing for the first time in history. Yeah, I have. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm a capitalist.
And the one that has been signed now with retail steel, it's not.
The government has 30% equity participation in that, but there is no private Liberian participation. That's the point I'm trying to make to you, Mr. Moore. There is no private Liberian participation in that. So the government is going to get money, the government is going to get rich out of that, Military is going to get rich out of that, but then there is no Liberian interest, either institutional or private participation in that. Now the government can say, okay, we have 30%, let's find institutional means to divest a portion of our 30% in the hands of Liberian entrepreneurs by selling those shares to institutions like banks, like insurance companies, like other companies, or Liberians who have access to money, they can buy into the government's participation. Yeah, exactly. Which is there now.
Which they can use.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But historically, in the concession agreements I'm talking about, which was 50-50, there was no sophistication on the part of the Liberian government. What these companies did, what they did was they overpriced expenses, they overstated expenses and understated income. And we did something called transfer pricing, where they sold our iron ore to affiliated companies at non-arm's length transactions that inflated the cost. Do you understand? I mean, the undercut the cost of this thing. And guess what? If you look at NAMCO, NROC, they rarely declared dividends because guess what? They did not show a profit. For most of the time they were in existence in this country. It did not show a profit. It showed losses. There were transfer pricing. And then it was only in the beneficiation stage, that's when they show their profit on the transformation of iron ore to steel. That's when Republic Steel show profit. That's when Beverly Steel show profit. And I guarantee you, if we don't put the controls in place today, there will be no show of profits, because Metal will first of all have to amortize the capitalization in terms of the money they're spending, including the equipment. Okay? And if they're going to take any loans, you have to amortize the interest expense of those loans, and for a long time, you will not see any profit. So government's 30% in Metal Steel will just be a mirage. But in the transformation, because Metal is doing something called vertical integration. They're taking the primary product, which is iron ore, and they send it to an affiliate company, and they're transforming the steel, and they're selling the steel, which is more probably at 4 or 5 times the value of iron ore. You understand? So if we do not demand, for example, that be some value added by resources in our country, we'll continue to be poor. And if we do not have Liberian everyday participation in major projects in this country, we will not ride the growth curve. There will be a lot of growth, as it is now, 8 to 10% growth, but there will be no development, because Liberians will not be riding the growth curve of this emerging economy. I hope I've clarified my point to you.
And we talk about, my colleague asked you a question, especially on youth. So those who organize, funded, raise money for the people that want to come, in the name that other people are going to be killed. Do you know what's that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My question is, who are those people? Can you name some?
Well, I remember from having conversations, and I heard, this is the say, okay? This is the say, that people who were going around America to raise funds for the NPFL were saying to certain prominent Liberians in America who have money that Joe was going to kill more people, therefore they needed to fund the NPFL. Well, I'm talking not from first hand, I'm talking from rumors. Yeah. So when I'm speaking from rumors, unless you force it on me, I'm not going to say it. Because I don't have any facts on that, and I'm speaking from rumor. But I heard that prominently, that this was the way to raise funds by playing on the fears of people in America, that Joe was going to kill more people. Okay? But if you force me, if you subpoena me later on, and you say, Sam, who did this, I'll be more than happy to do that. But for now, for the purpose of this, I'm not going to get involved in that. And the other reason why this is truth and reconciliation. But I'm the 12 protecting witness. I see what happens when you say something here, how it's twisted. So I will stick to the facts as I know them, not from hearsay. Because hearsay is not evidence in court. And I understand too, let me finish, and I understand too the legal implications of what I say here. Because the TRC has the mandate to recommend prosecution later on. So I have to be mindful of my rights to promote self-determination, my rights to think the hearsay, and all of those things. So when I speak the truth as I know it, but not the truth as I heard it. That's a big difference.
Thank you so much.
Testing. Thank you, Mr. Witness, for your presentation. I have 12 questions for you. I will start off by saying that please realize that we on the Commission realize that the period from 1960 to 2000 was a historical period for change from selfish individual leadership worldwide to selfless, altruistic leadership worldwide. And so, with what is called today the culture of violence and hatred towards a culture of peace and harmony. Yet the Liberian people have mandated us to promote peace, security, national unity, and reconciliation through investigating violations of gross human rights laws. We were asked to understand the motive, circumstances, and antecedents and accountability factors linked to these violations, and work out a plan of action to ensure this never happens again. So with that background, I have a set of questions that are politically linked and a set economically linked. I will start off with the political ones. Did your being born with a silver spoon near your mouth in any way affect your burning desire to change the system that fed you, or were your altruistic desires influenced by your religion, your education, or your conscience?
So the comment a lot of factors, Commissioner Coleman, thanks for asking the question. In terms of my motivation, why I began involved in student politics and movement. I indicated to you earlier the modest background from whence I come. Mother a market woman and the father a cook. But my father was not just any ordinary cook. My father was a cook on the presidential yacht on the Tubman. And my father traveled. Every time Tubman was aboard on the yacht, my father went. And every time the yacht had to go to dry dock, my father went. My father spent months and months away from us, in places like Liverpool and places like Canary Islands in England. So my father went to Birmingham in the 60s and spent like 11 months away from us. So naturally, spending that much time from us, going to a foreign country, it would bring me things that other children did not have. So my life was not abject poverty, and by no means am I indicating that I had abject poverty. I had a life of some privileges compared to the rest of society, and I had toys and privileges compared to the rest of society. And don't forget, I went to the presidential yacht where my father worked in the kitchen. So I ate the food that the president ate, and in the same dishes the president ate out of. So my life was a life of privilege, relatively speaking. But you can't tell me, Brother Coleman, that I had access to greater privileges than that. But comparatively speaking, living in Stoneyway, we were the family that people looked at in Stoneyway. Robert Jackson Sondale, a pa worked on the yacht, and I had toys, I had bicycles, I had footballs, he bought me boots, he bought me jerseys, so I had more privileges than an ordinary child. But make no mistake about it, in the 60s of my youth, every time I went to visit a young girl, her parents did ask me, Jackson, wasn't that Jackson from Carrisburg? And when I said my father was a cook, you can imagine what the reaction would be. Now, as I got smarter, I stopped seeing cook and I started to see chef. That had a better ring to it. But I'm saying this to say to you, I was influenced by my access, my near access to privileges, my denial of privileges, my upbringing, but my genealogy, my root, where I came from, were people that were suppressed in a present society. And even though I myself enjoyed those privileges, because of my father, I never forgot that the rest of society was living in abject poverty, and the rest of society had to be liberated from these negatives.
Thank you very much. It reminds me of Moses living in the palace and thinking about his people. Okay, next. You mentioned that the only goal PAL had was to demand political pluralism and multi-party politics through non-violent means. Yet we see that though Tolman's administration agreed with PAL's requests for multi-party politics, they still decided to demand the government to stop being a government and have a by-election without a broad-based national referendum to validate such demand. Now we see that very act has historically become the catalyst of the 1980 coup. So please comment on why this became so critically necessary in light of the fact that elections were just around the corner. You did mention something previously from my colleagues that it seems like history just destined our suffering. No, but would you like to add anything else to that?
Yeah, well look, I indicated to you in terms of the centrality or non-centrality of our role And I'm sure you're alluding to the midnight demonstration on March 3rd, 1980, in the previous week about the resolution calling for Mr. Tolbert to resign because the citizens of the country no longer. Now, while I may have disagreed with the methodology and approach of that, and don't ask me why I didn't see anything publicly going down, I'm pleased to see because democracy reigns if the majority of the people in the organization believe that you have to accept the consequences for that. And I paid the price because, as you know, and I intimated to you earlier, I went to jail precisely because of March 8, 1980. But I can tell you that there were many members of that who did not understand now, as we do now, that Mr. Matthews, quote unquote, was trying to avert a coup. And that's why he went to the mansion in 1980. It makes a lot of sense now. But in 1980, when we picked up my butt, excuse my language, with my torture and took the postdoc, it didn't make any sense. But now, with the benefit of history, and listen to testimonies here, I believe my colleagues when they said that Matthews was trying to avert a coup. Because I cannot see any other reason for going to the mansion in the middle of the night, for whatever reason, except you had something critical bothering you had to do. And now Matthews' explanation is what I will take for now until there is some other evidence that contradict Mr. Matthews' going to the mansion with colleagues of mine that particular night. So while I may not have agreed with that decision, I supported it, and there is clarity now because of historical events why he went to the mansion.
Okay, so in summary, I'm understanding that it could have been diverted. Okay, next, seeing how PAL succeeded in its objectives, though by violence instead of non-violent means, do you think things would have been different at the transition taking place without violence? Also, do you believe that all things being as they were, a non-violent change could have taken place? Or was it destiny's will for our nation to suffer as we did? And please don't use the concept of the leaders should have known any better. No, we know about that part. They didn't know any better.
I'll tell you something better, sir. I will tell you if my mother, if my aunt didn't have, something, she would be my aunt. So that's a hypothetical, and I've been thinking about that debate for a long time. Look, seriously, here is it, you cannot use hypotheticals for historical events. You can say if Prince Gavrilo, hadn't shot, the Archbishop Ferdinand, they would not have done World War I. And if you can say that if Nelson Mandela had not been put in Robben Island, he would not become president in 1994. History is not based on hypotheticals, it's based upon actual events. Now, there are incidents that trigger historical events, but I can almost guarantee you that the current crises we faced before would have happened whether Caleb Barker Matthew, Oscar Kuyakankala, Deacon Mosely, or if any more people were alive or not. Because all people would have stepped to the plate and played the historical role. And I continue to say to you that these are accidents of history. Because all of these names, Charles Dagger, Taylor, Samuel Doe, Deacon Mosely, Ernest Mosely, these are just vessels that are used by the Almighty to affect historical and construct historical events. It does not matter, but it will still happen. If Hitler had to kill 6 million Jews, you would still have the state of Israel today. So history cannot be looked upon as if this, if that. No. History is a continuum, is connected by dots. So whether I was born or not, the events of history would have happened, but I would not have been involved as a participant. But these things would have still happened.
Thank you. So your answer is destiny.
Absolutely.
Next, your group sought to seek non-violence to seek non-violently, rather, the reign of leadership in Liberia, quote from your presentation. Providence gave your group that very reign of power after the coup, as you just stated. Yet, you each gradually had to resign from said power base, and history shows how the nation spiraled down the road of chaos. So, in retrospect, would you agree that quality and methodology of change are more critical than change itself, and that the environment was not ready for the revolution as it was staged by PBB? I'm using this in light of the fact that the French had a revolution. It was bloody. They killed their leader, cut his head off. But in England, they had a revolution. It was glorious. Some situation was such that a new leader came up, the old leader ran away, and they started a new process. So I'm just saying, looking at all of that, what would you say that?
Jeremy, you've asked this question many of my predecessor in the methodology. And it's based upon a faulty premise that we came to power. The PRC came to power, Commissioner. There was not, no. We have to admit, and I'm not going to argue this. The PRC came to power. The PRC is a military organization with its rules. The Progressive Alliance of Liberia and Moja did not come to power. And I can tell you that we did not have the ability to affect the changes or to facilitate the process or to cause the historical change that you so want us to be a part of. We could not change it, Commissioner. We couldn't. If you know the things that you know now, that in less than 2 years after the coup, because of the East-West rivalry, because of the machinations by outside forces against the progressives within the government, that we were no longer part and parcel of that government. You know that, Commissioner. But yet you continue to say that we have the reins of power. So wherever that is written, we need to strike that out. We never had the reins of power. The reins of power was not given to Marcus Matthew, Oscar Kuya, Samuel Jackson, D. Kankala. The PRC had their own setup. Master Sergeant Samuel Canyon Doe was an executive. The People's Prudential Council had a council that was headed. They made decisions. We just took orders from them. Now, Nuremberg said that the thing of just taking orders doesn't work. But guess what? Commissioner, I left 1981 before they put military uniforms on the very lucky, and I was hoping somebody would ask that question. I was very blessed that I left 1981 because not too long thereafter, they put the members of Kyle and Doja in put them in the uniforms so they could conform to UCMJ or what they thought was UCMJ. So there was not a military arrangement, Commissioner Coleman. This was a military arrangement with clear objectives, and I believe not too long after the coup, and I'm going to tell you a story today that for the record, and I'm going to call her name because the person wrote a book. Frank P. Cataloso, the public affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy in Monrovia at a particular time, had written a book. And that book is called No Boss Man. That book is a fictional account of the coup, but it is very clear from Mr. Cataloso's fictional account that this is his recollection of history. I saw Mr. Cataloso at the executive mansion telling the PRC on April 13, 1980 that they did not have enough arms and ammunition. They should not be shooting the guns, and they should be stationed in many certain places. And does that say the U.S. government was involved in it? Of course not. But it would have been Mr. Cataloso's own means of ensuring that there was not a counter that would have destroyed whole lives and property. Now, Air Moose came to Liberia, as you've heard, and they began to influence Sergeant Doe to put him in the orbit of the West because there was an East-West rivalry in 1980. we did not fit the bill of people who were going to collaborate with putting this government into the orbit of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They believed we were communists. They believed that we were going to institute a left-wing communist regime into this country, and who would be expropriating properties, who would be nationalizing industries, and all of those things that socialist countries had done before. So if we had the power, Commissioner Sherman, to be able to take full power, we would not have been out in 2 years. We would have stayed the course, and we would have been the powers that be. But we were not. There were other forces that were teleguiding the process, and there are other forces teleguiding the process in Liberia today. There is a rivalry now between the East and the West, and that is playing right here within Liberia today, where there's some fear that people from the East should not have a major commercial presence in Liberia because they want access to our resources. And there's another country from the West who wants to have access or open access to our resources, and so they do not want a major commercial presence of people from the East. And I believe some of the stalemate we've seen, just physical transformation and our real development, is due to that stalemate. Today, we're even affected today. The Chinese want to do the hydro. The Americans don't want the Chinese to do the hydro. The Chinese want to do the Cape Mountain Highway. The Americans want to do that. Global Witness, the Sierra Club, and Conservation International, they don't want any working in this country because they want to sell carbon credits. It's still going on. People interfering in the internal affairs of this country to have unfettered access to our resources. And the manipulated national leadership put it against each other. And this is the current debate that is happening, and we should debate this as Liberians. Okay? The foreign policy. But of course, it's difficult to discuss the foreign policy construct when you have 14,000 men and women armed trying to protect you. So you can't have an independent foreign policy. So you can't use your foreign policy as a means of constructing the physical infrastructure of this country for economic development. And that debate continues.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I can say then that technically the revolution that was started in 1979 was somehow hijacked by another violent means that perpetuated itself through 3 cycles, and now that the dust has landed, we find ourselves still in need of a proper revolutionary change.
Of course, absolutely. And let me tell you some of the confluence of events. It's extremely important. You have Power Moja. Power, strictly from the United States, with no real philosophical leanings. And Commissioner Stewart can confirm this to me. What Moja was well-grounded in philosophy, because most of the Moja members were university professors with philosophical leanings. And also the International Union of Students that was supporting the Students' Unification Party, according to my own estimation, has some leftist leanings. And it belonged to Socialist International. So there was our rivalry. Then there was a rivalry on the ethnic side between Huampa and Joe that eventually culminated into December 24, 1989. Then you also have this rivalry with forces of the TWP trying to creep their way back into power. And they crept their way back into power by manipulating the system and using fear of communism. Okay? Because don't forget, the TWP spoke with 2 sides of his mouth when it came to the Cold War politics. While the True Party said that they believed in American form of capitalism, but there was some capiting with the True Party by African nationalists. So the Americans of the West would not trust the True Party to maintain their communications, their Omega, and all of the things that was being used as a communication center for West Africa here. So there was fear. So all of those events began to manifest itself in the rivalries, where some getting killed, Tipota being exiled, Obama Famula not agreeing with the Israeli influences because of the Palestinian thing, all of those things. Sam Jackson being removed from his job, all of that. There were leaflets passed around this country because this was the battleground, like a battleground state between East and West, for the heart and soul of Liberians. And we paid a bitter price because we did not refuse to be part of that bipolar world that descended upon us. So we were victims.
Thank you. Now I'll go to the economic questions. First of all, did you say that you were educated originally with Karl Marx's vision of Das Kapital, along with the normal capitalistic vision?
No, I never said that. I said that, but you know, now I went to school in America, and actually it was Milton Friedman and Howard Brandon and Samuelson and all of those other things, you know, and Drucker and the whole thing, you know, Westinghouse and Taylor and all that, right? But I read, and I was influenced by those books. Now, bear in mind, a black man in America in the late 60s and early 70s. And what was happening in America with the civil rights movement, it had to influence us. Also, the fight for the anti-colonial movement, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, you know, all of these things have some influences. Yes, so I read Das Kapital and I was influenced by it. And I read Fed the Head of the Phenomenology of Mind, I was influenced by it. Okay? And I read Walter Rodney, I was influenced by all of these things. And I read other, the whole thing about Bashir Buhari, I was influenced. But now, was I a hard-carrying member of the Communist Party? Of course not. Because I was not grounded philosophically enough in these philosophies to be, but yes, I parroted some of those things, I gave verbiage to it, but I wasn't grounded as a thing. But that was my heart, okay, as a young man.
Thank you. Next, were you all not, let me see. After the coup, the 1980 coup, were you given a chance to bring the so-called cheap rice to Liberia? And what happened?
Nobody was given a chance to bring the cheap rice, because I told you that when the coup took place, we had a base of power. Now, those forces that wanted to bring this rice, now maybe they were trying to manipulate the process, but they never came forward to bring this rice, because there was, as I told you, an application from a group of Liberians to bring rice in. Okay? And the government of the True Party denied this. Now, so ourselves did not and could not have the ability to bring rice in at any price. They don't have the money. But the forces or the business interests that could have brought it in never made the application. Now, you could say maybe they did it for political reasons, or maybe a year later world market conditions had changed and the commodity prices had gone up, so they couldn't bring it in. Shipping costs, insurance costs, all of those factors are going into the price mix of change. So for whatever reason, it didn't happen. I can tell you what happened. In 1980, there was rising commodity prices. Gold was about $1,200, sugar was about $1,200, and rice had gone up significantly in 1980. Because it was a time of high inflation and high interest rate in the United States. The interest rate in the United States in 1980 was 14%. In terms of, not prime was about 10%, but in terms of mortgages, 14% and 15%. Okay? And gold was over $1,000. So the conditions that probably existed in 1979 did not exist in 1980. Yes, and you can, but I can tell you what I did. We needed rice. So we did what? Appealed to the U.S. government. I went to the United States and I facilitated the PL40 program by bringing rice to Liberia. By going to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they sent me to Houston and to Mississippi, and we brought in rice on my watch when I was Deputy Minister of Commerce, Industry, and Transportation. So I made some efforts but let me talk to the rice. And what I'm about to say, it will rub a lot of people the wrong way. We need to solve this rice problem in this country once and for all. There's a reason why. I don't think government should be held hostage for the price of rice. The reason for that is the government of Liberia does not have the ability to influence prices in the world. And the government, by getting itself involved in getting the price of rice, puts itself at a disadvantage because the political machinery and the people will always demand government to bring the price of rice down. The government should not be involved in pricing commodities on the market except strategic commodities that have. And rice to me is not a strategic commodity because we can live without rice. 10, 15 miles from the city of Monrovia, we can plant arrows, we can plant plantains, we can plant cassava, we can do all these things. Why do we continue to hold the governments in this country hostage to bring the price of rice down or starch that we cannot make in sufficient quantity to feed ourselves? Why must we continue doing that? Why must Mr. Salif always have to worry when the price of rice is going up in the international market, when he has better things to do? No president since 1980 has solved the rice problem. It needs to be solved now. It needs to be solved now because we have an opportunity to make a major difference in how we allocate resources. We are taking a significant slice of our national income and importing a starch that can be easily produced in this country. And that is continuing something that will lead us down being back. Here we have to go now and beg Indians and the Chinese when 25, 30 years ago, these people couldn't feed themselves. Okay? And we have to go hat in hand and beg these people to give us rice because if they cover the production of rice, there will be political problems in Liberia. We need to go beyond that. If we say we are free marketers, then we should allow prices of commodities to seek their level based upon equilibrium supply and demand. But if you're going to get involved in determining prices and making price statements, then you will be held hostage to those prices. So we need to do something significant such as an open market. And I trust the market. I'm not going to let me down my soapbox. I got a chance. We have an opportunity to trust market forces or the government. And I can tell you, I trust market forces today than I trust any government. So let the market forces work.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that it seems a couple of years ago, this is exactly what Mr. Tolbert was trying to do to make us self-reliant in this area. And the history just showed that it could be done cheaper, that focusing on getting cheaper rice is more important for our people. But anyway, it's good that now we realize that we got to get ourselves.
Oh, Gerald, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I will never let you get away with that. Gerald, there was self-interest. There was self-interest in this. There was money going to a rice stabilization thing, and there was money for the rice stabilization fund that was putting the price of rice on this market. If Mr. Tolbert wanted to do something, what he should have done was to take himself out of the rice market, but he made himself a problem by being a rice importer and being a referee and a player. So that's not what I'm talking. If Tolbert had said, I don't care, let it go to anything, but I'm telling you, no more importation of rice. Well, the rice that is produced here will be the rice that we eat, and force us, because he could have done it because of our autocratic regime, he would have forced us to go back to the soil and produce rice for ourselves. He didn't do that. What he wanted to do was to profit from the increase in the price of rice. So that was an ulterior motive, so you were wrong. He wasn't trying to do that. There was an ulterior motive associated with that.
Thank you. I hope somebody can do that now. Next. If we have such a huge net worth of 300 billion plus, why, in your opinion, we cannot pay off our debts, credit cash capital to invest into our own production of steel, timber, oil, and technological ventures so that Liberians retain at least 85% ownership?
Because they're stupid.
Oh, okay.
That's all. Let me explain.
No, I mean,
we are stupid.
I just want to make sure.
You have carbon fiber net worth but putting $300 billion in your resources, in your iron ore, your gold, and your forest resources, and you have a debt burden of $4.5 billion, and you're talking about the critical piece of the foundation of your economic policy is debt forgiveness, that's a joke. The critical piece of economic policy should be how do we monetize what we have in the ground? Because there are companies that come here with no money, get tenure, go on the international market, like the alternative index market, and raise money. It's happening now. Right now, there's a company that got in the southeast a plantation. Go to the inn. This company called EBF is floating stock. They want to raise $15 million using what? Liberian assets. And we have the palm plantation, we have the land, and there is somebody who is a Lebanese man who has over 30 to 40% of that company. We give it to them, Gerald. We give it to them. This is something that we own, and we give it to them and say, here's a piece of paper, you have tenure. Now that's an asset that has value. So they're going to London and they're going to raise 30 million pounds, Gerald. When you and I can write a business proposal that can raise a single amount of money and we can own it. And what do you think is going to happen? Let me finish. What do you think is going to happen to the profits from that? Thank you. No, I just said.
I understand.
Okay, what's happening?
No, I mean, this is why I'm giving you this opportunity to speak, because I feel something about what you said. So I'm going to actually, the next one, we should add more to what you said. Okay, the next thing is, are you saying that you and other Liberians could have raised international funding to finance the former Lamco project, which Metal Steel is now funding?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me tell you.
But we don't qualify that. I want to qualify making point for you.
No,
that's one point. Qualification. The reason why I asked this, I spent about 4 or 5 years in Korea, and I studied there. I found out that in South Korea, the late President Park worked with Korean businessmen to develop Korean ownership and local technological transfer through companies like Daewoo, Hyundai, Samsung, etc. as part of what he called the Semao movement. These were gentlemen, there was a general understanding that they would eventually turn their stocks over to the public at the end. Okay? So that the average Korean could share in that ownership later. So his leadership was able to restore Korean ownership, first of what was needed to develop, and next to ensure the distribution of wealth to the common people by stock marketing system. Today, Korea has moved from a small, unknown country to the 9th or 10th economic power in the world. And they don't even have 1/100th of the wealth we have. So that's the premise I want you to use.
And thank you for validating, but let me expound on that. It's important because we need to understand that we will continue to be poor because we're stupid. And I say that in a loving way to Liberians. There is something called a bankable feasibility for a project. It starts with an exploration that you get a license and you can raise money when you have an exploration license. Now that license is an asset. If you find a piece of property 200 miles from here and they give you the 1,000 square kilometers, which is your minimum concession block, and they say you have an exploration license, your fees, what they call the surface rental fee, are minimum, within $1,000, you can raise that working backwards. You now have something which is tangible, and you can start raising money internationally for exploration and validation to prove those resources. As you prove those resources in a bankable way, and you bring up the value, you can now do what? Put together a prospectus and get an investment banker to do what? Act as a sponsor on the international stock exchange to raise the money. That is done every day in Ghana. Project finance is done by capital market raising fund in Nigeria. In fact, Nigeria, believe it or not, is the most liquid of stock markets right now if you compare the Western stock markets. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, all of these stock markets in the world is awash in trillions of dollars of liquidity looking for a place. Let me tell you something to show you how crazy and stupid we are. The housing market crunch in the United States of America was caused by something called subprime. You know what subprime is? Subprime mortgage is a piece of paper that is not even a toilet tissue. People were given mortgages with no income, no job, nothing, and these loans were packaged and resold to international investment bankers like Merrill Lynch, and Bear Stearns, JP Morgan, all these people. But we have assets that are worth money. Now, when you have cash flow income from people, from borrowers who are paying, you can discount those cash flows or you can collateralize those cash flows. But there were no cash flows from these businesses, from these houses, because they were liar's loans that were made. Now, if these people have the ability to package loans, packages, mortgages that really have no value and take them to international stock exchanges, international investment bankers and get hundreds of billions of dollars, why can't we do that here when we have the value to prove? So what has happened now? The American government will do what? Subsidize the mortgage companies that took the thing, because a lot of those liars mortgages were what? FHA that were what? Securitized or guaranteed by the US government. So Indy Mac crisis, Freddie Mac crisis, Merrill Lynch crisis, Bear Stearns crisis, and all of these crises will be subsidized. See, we have an opportunity to do some of the same things, but they know we won't do it, because you know what? The moment we started for the coma, they said, the exchange action one day, what are you talking about? You ask a question, will we raise 1.5 billion? Of course we can raise 1.5 billion. If we put together a credible, special purpose vehicle, and we can outsource the management, meaning that we can get credible international management, people with the resume and CVs that they trust, we can pay them and outsource it. So we're using their name and their intellectual property to do what? To raise capital. And that can be done. But we continue on the old economic paradigm of giving resources to companies, they shipping it out, and they can't finish goods at 10, 15 times the value. And that is a recipe to keep us in poverty for the rest of our lives.
Thank you. My final statement. Considering that we have net worth of 400 billion, as you have stated, you need from you.
Be careful with our figure, because I don't want to see the papers tomorrow for the same that I said we want 400 billion. That's not what I said. I was only quantifying our minimum assets, and I was saying these are the proper values. But you have to make provisions for a lot of stuff like political stability, so it will have to be discounted because of where it is. The value of the asset is contingent upon the state of security and stability in the region where it is. So the market will discount those features. So don't say 300 billion, leave it like that.
Okay, well, whatever.
But markets do that all the time. Even a stock, if people feel that the cash flow or the income of this company will now rise, what happens? That share comes down. So it goes up and down based upon the market perception. Okay?
I understand. Thank you for the correction. But assuming whatever, is there a way you can put together a recommendation package to us?
Which I have done that.
Such that, well, let me conclude, make sure that it's economy, such that at least 80% even of that wealth can be restored to its legitimate owners, the Liberian people, and distributed equitably to the same Liberian people as a whole, in such a way that we can see final reconciliation of our differences and are living together in peace and contributing to the healthy, larger society of Africa and the world. I promise you, if we can do such a thing, then I will personally lobby to recommend that it be included in the TRC's work with regards to the rebuilding of our nation after our inquiry exercise has shown the legitimacy of it. And finally, in harmony with that, it appears that during the next 10 years, 2006 to 2016, we all need to work collectively together to ensure that the Liberian leadership class restores our economic ownership and thus ensures the proper distribution of our wealth If not, history will now hold all of us alive and listening to this radio program, collectively responsible for the future failure of this glorious land of liberty. And then I'll let you know.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've already done that. I have a company, a management company, which I'm the chief executive officer of, and we managed to raise more than $1 million to pay for geophysical interpretation of our oil resources, hydrocarbon resources, and it's been determined by our world-class geophysicists that we have between 9 to 15 billion barrels of oil in our offshore. And we made a recommendation to the government of Liberia in the question of Madam Sadiq that we would like to take the national oil company to a stock exchange. And we can cash the value of the oil well, and we can use that for reconstruction. And I'm hoping and praying that the government can give us a favorable response. And two, we're looking for paper too. Government needs to say, okay, yes, go ahead and do this, and then we use that as a basis now to take it to a credible stock exchange and to put together the special purpose vehicle, and we can raise capital. And that will not affect concessions already granted, because in the oil industry, there's something called PFA, the production sharing agreement. And all of these oil companies that are here getting oil blocks, what they're doing is, they are signing an agreement with the government of Liberia that when they start producing, there will be a split of profits with government, and they call it a production sharing agreement. And most of the time it's 70-30, 60-40, or 20-80. So the government has assets, literally, that can be monetized and can be used for reconstruction by putting together this person for a vehicle. But you have to take this to the marketplace, you have to package it properly, and you have to have tight, watertight, what should I say, prospectus in geophysical interpretation, and you have to move along things. But I was telling you, right now there's a rental with a ship, a couple of boats on the ocean that is doing 3D drilling right now in your offshore, drilling your oil well. And many people don't even know about that. And one of the reasons why I know because I'm close to the industry. But you didn't know that there's a 3D process beginning, and in 1 or 2 more years to be an oil rig on there. But I believe that about 9 to 15 billion barrels is offshore. Now I didn't say that. It was done by the world-class physicists, and I have a document, and I presented to our government as my contribution to the development of this country. And we're still waiting to see what will happen from things. And I know in this country there's something called paralysis of analysis. There will be a lot of negative. Why am I saying that? Someone does it, I can with 1 billion, what you kind of public kind of value, what you got possible, the whole thing, you know. But if I were white, you know, and I came from, one of those companies, small companies, and they will pay more heed to that. And the thing is, we don't respect each other. Look at the number of African professionals in this country, and look at the number of consultants that are coming in to study of problem that we know more about than they do. And look at the amount of money they're paying them in terms of professional fees compared to what we pay Liberians. Do you know, Gerald, with all my education, Mr. Commissioner Corbin, with all my education, all I'm worth on the U.S. ARD project is $109.80 a day. But if I said I'm an American citizen, then I would be paid $570.80 a day. It's happening when I had a project last year that I could not go on. We had to put Liberians with American passport on there to work with us to get a higher bill. That's the reality.
Okay, I understand your proposal, but as I listen to it, I still don't see how Liberians can restore their ownership of that proposal and how the wealth from that proposal will be distributed to the common people in the interior. For example, if you put it on the stock market, some billionaire anywhere in the world will say, hey, that's a good investment, I'll put my money there. And then he becomes the owner, not Liberian.
Yeah, but
so where is the Liberian element and the potential of distributing for our own advertisement in a sense of benefit for our common people?
I thought I was clear. You would have to relinquish a a small portion of ownership. Okay, a small portion of ownership discounted in order to have monies today instead of monies 25 and 30 years ago. When you're discounting the cash flows, you're getting that money now for reconstruction, for political stability, and you're using that money to strengthen institutions, build infrastructure, develop businesses, put it into banks, put it into boost domestic entrepreneurship, doing all of those things that will solidify economic development. So instead of waiting 25, 30 years from now for oil revenues to come in, or 15, 20 years for oil revenues to come in, you own it now, you discount a portion, you sell a portion, you get the money, you use it. But I tell you what, you're using the money now, you can go ahead and use the infrastructure to go into rev other sectors. So you get X amount of dollars, now you go to agriculture, now you can go to forest, now you go to fishery, now you go to all of this. But it was monies that you would normally get 25, 30 years from now that you're getting now and putting it into businesses today to achieve multiplier coefficient that will grow the economy.
Please put the proposal together, let us have a copy.
I already done that. The president has a copy. Look, no, I think, listen. The TRC is not a commercial transaction. I've done that, and I've given the president of Liberia. But if you want me to do 2 or 3 pages of explanation how it works, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. That would be appreciated.
Yeah, I will do that. For a small fee, right?
Well, no, if you love your country, the fee should be that you can be part of history.
Yeah, no, I will. Thank you very much.
So with this, thank you very much. Or should I say, Sam?
Willie Gwen.
Willie Gwen.
Can I call you John?
You are at liberty.
You can't say that? Commissioner.
You are at liberty. Please. But so much for the economic talk. And I want to take you back into history a little bit. And perhaps plead with you to bear with me if I may sound redundant considering the other commission that posed similar questions, and perhaps maybe they are identical questions to you. But again, this is an exercise of introspection and recording details of our history, where there are gaps and all of that. I see you looking at your time.
No.
I hope you're not pressed by time.
No, it's not pressed by time.
Right.
Let me have a watch.
Now, my first question to you would have been, what is your recollection of the events of April 12, 1980? But suffice it to say, you have expounded quite a lot on those events of 1980 and all of that. But let me just narrow down to one question. To the best of your recollection, what do you know about the execution of 13 local officials? Was this act done in consonance or with the acquiescence of the progressives who have been recruited to the government? Did they have a say in how the determination was done and when and all of that? Can you throw some light on that to the best of your recollection?
So first of all, let me get question this. First of all, there's a myth that's been going around this country now for the last 29 years that Dole did not know that a man named Frank Toller was executed and sent for Frank Toller one day, not Frank Toller, Frank Stewart, the budget director, and they said, oh, but he killed a man. Look, the PRC was the PRC, had a mind of their own. And I cannot see, and I have not seen any evidence that they consulted any progressive, including the members of Power Moja or the civilian members of the administration, okay, in their decision to execute. Remember, they set up their own structure. They had a tribunal, headed by Francis Penny. They had a trial, and people spoke at the trial. members of the Tory party denouncing the Tory party. So, Commissioner, from my perspective, I think it was purely a decision of the PRC for the execution, because let me tell you where I was when the execution happened. I was at a meeting at the Ministry of Lands, Mines, and Energy, and when I came out, my daughter ran to me and said, "Oh, they killed some people on the beach." And that was that. And I was curious, so I went there, drove there. When that thing was over, and I just saw the people lying. Did that make me sick to my stomach? Of course it made me sick to my stomach. You know? And I have said that to people who were affected in terms of loved ones who were killed on that particular day. You know? And I think history from that time and our various actions would manifest whether we were personally involved in that decision or not. Now, people didn't think anything, but the facts are there. And I can tell you that I have no reason to believe that any one of the progressives, Kyle and Moja, were involved in making a list or were involved in the process to execute those people.
Thank you very much. Now, if we go maybe just one step backwards, your colleague from the Progressive Alliance, Mr. Kala, testified recently, and he alluded to events that happened just right before the demonstration, the day preceding the day on which the demonstration should have taken place. Was that he said that there were attempts to persuade Mr. Matthews in the face of reports, confirmed reports, that the government would have used force on that day and would have likely shot people on that day. There were attempts to convince him into accepting a decision to call off the demonstration, but he appeared reluctant to do so. No, he's not here to answer, but you being a member of the hierarchy at the time, what would you say was responsible for this reluctance?
I think I had that question before, Commissioner, but let me just say this. There was talk that people were going to be shot, but I explained that for Commissioner earlier in terms of and I used the analogy of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Martin Luther King taking, protested across that bridge, or led Valencia for solidarity, put the people into the streets of Warsaw, or Nelson Mandela with the movement, all of that. It is easy now, 2020 hindsight, to say, well, the people were at risk. Why did they put them at risk? But I can guarantee you, Commissioner Schuler, nobody was forced to go to the headquarters. And if you remember, our court relative of yours wrote a definitive history of that. He went to Mr. Tolba several times. And there was back and forth between Mr. Tolba and Mr. Matthews, from what I understand. And even on the day of the demonstration, the leadership of PAC had decided to call off the demonstration. But in those days, as you know, there was only one radio station, and there were no cell phones, so people began to gather at PAC headquarters even before the crack of dawn. And they began to gather there, and it was from the provocation by the National Police Force at that time, or whatever it was, LMP, that shots began to fire. And then the actions of the people who were assembled at the party headquarters were to take to the streets. And then in the melee and bedlam that ensued, that caused a riot. And more loss of lives. So, to answer your question, with my 55-year-old brains, in my 25-year-old body, and looking at the events of the last 29 years, I would not make those same decisions today. But I can tell you that when you are a revolutionary, you take decisions and he puts everything at risk. And Matthew and others put their own lives at risk. And they didn't ask anybody, they didn't force anybody to go to the headquarters. They went there with their what? Using their own medulla oblongata and agreed to go assemble over there. So to answer the question, yes, looking back at the time and the decision of a particular time, I don't see how the demonstration could not have gone on because the very credibility of the Liberia and its leadership was on the line. Because this was showdown between the TWP and PAL. So whoever was going to blink was going to be somebody that would have lost today. And PAL did not want to be the one who lose today. So PAL had no choice but to stand his ground. And you can say the government should have backed down, but that's 2020, and that's history. And let's not do what if, John. Let's just move forward. It happened. You will not pay the price. We spent a wonderful time post-back together. We're not post-back the central president to know one another. And you are a member of the TRC today, and I'm here testifying, and that's just the way history, that's destiny.
Right, we just move on a little bit further. Why were then you visibly upset when from prison, Mr. Matthews wrote a letter of apology to the president? And you appeared visibly upset.
I was upset, and I understand it now. And I think Matthew's isolation in NSA and whatever psychological manipulation that may be done to him made him write a letter. He claims that it was a deal between him and Mr. Togo to write a letter to see the government's face. It probably was, John. I don't know that. But Matthew lost a lot of credibility because of that letter. A lot of credibility. And I think some things died that day in terms of the favor on some of the more educated members of society who were members of PAL. And if you notice, Commissioner, there was a pullback of intelligentsia from PAL after April 14. And it became more of a grassroots organization dealing with people from the slums and other places because that particular action was a reflection on Mr. Matthews, according to some people, in terms of character. And he did not show character that day. And it really disappointed some people. Understandably. And so it affected in terms of the composition of the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. It went from a cadre, a leadership cadre, to more grassroots after April 14. I think we saw the evolution of that.
Okay, fast forward to the close of the close of the decade. So when did you join the government of President Charles Taylor?
2002, February 2nd.
How would you describe the human rights record of that government?
Terrible.
And against this background, and progressive, given to say his human rights records were most appalling, how can then one explain your joining a government which was virtually under siege at the time, and with the writing on the wall that it was going to fall? So against the backdrop of a government steeped in human rights abuses, as you would say, and besieged, what were your motivations for joining the government? Was it for case of power?
No, nationalism, because you understand one thing. The economy was contracting a little 5% a year. Sanctions were imposed, and there were conditionality the national community had demanded from Mr. Taylor. The position of Minister of State Economic and Financial Affairs was vacant. I felt it was an opportunity to do some public good in terms of helping to stabilize a declining economy and put together structures to meet the requirements of the national community, and also to be able to influence Mr. Taylor whatever way I could in terms of moving forward. Now, did that happen? Probably not. Was I naive? Probably. But I can tell you that I would do it all over again because I tell you what, Remember, Mr. Commissioner, Liberia is not about people with strong moral imperatives. And while my ideals and my moral imperatives are strong, I don't believe the human rights of Mr. Taylor that I knew about were egregious enough why he was elected president to have stopped me from joining the government. I did not support Mr. Taylor when he was running the National Defense Force of Liberia. I insisted to him that he should stand for elections. I did not support Mr. Taylor in 1997. I supported Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf came in second place and she left Liberia. I stayed here for several years after that in and out. And in 2002, Mr. Taylor was now being besieged by a Moravian band, okay, that had some influences that were coming to this country to do damage to the physical infrastructure, to the political, social, economic of this country. I decided that it was time for me to help an elected government that won the plurality of 85% of the votes. So I have no regrets, I have no compunction, and given the opportunity to serve Mr. Taylor again at a particular time, I will take it upon as a patriotic duty to serve my country.
So, would you agree that the Moravian bands, as you described them, had reasons to launch a war, given that avenues to peaceful change and to dialogue have virtually been closed by the...
That's what they believe. That's what they believe.
What did that show on the ground?
But no. I'm not going to sit here and get into a little arguments where whether they lured, interloping, and killing tens of thousands of civilians can be justified because one man stood in their way. Now, if you want to justify the killings of 300,000 to 400,000 people, as was done in 1989, to remove the tower, I disagree with that. I believe there could have been other ways to have gotten Mr. Taylor to abdicate power. Remember, John, there were three elements in removing Taylor. One was the diplomatic isolation, the economic isolation, and the military option. Those options did not take into account the people of this country suffering, tearing them down, and killing innocent civilians. They didn't take that into. He did the same thing too. So I can understand why somebody would have done it. But that's not the moral equivalence, Brother Stewart. Someone has to have enough brains to say there's got to be a better way to get rid of leaders in this country besides killing tens of thousands of people. Mr. Taylor was wrong, Mr. DeMonte was wrong, and all of those who financed war and brought war to this country were very wrong because it is possible to remove a government by peaceful democratic means.
Now, with the hindsight, that becomes a debatable issue. But what would you say were your achievements in that regard?
Well, my achievement, I told you, was to make a template for the Kimberley process and to negotiate as an architect of the Accra Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which brought you commissioners to be sitting there today and asking me questions. We brought you the TRC. We made that document, and there's a signer here today, President Louis Brown, sitting at front seat there. We did that. We made sure that there was not a Rwanda-style genocide that happened in Monrovia by ensuring, by negotiating with Liberia and Odell in the international community that the Moravian band did not cross that bridge. It was not an accident that they didn't cross that bridge. They had the ability to cross that bridge. But we told the international community that the blood of our people will be in your hands if you allow this Moravian band to cross that bridge, because there would have been a Rwanda-led genocide in this country. I'm very proud of my role, of going to Tim Sebastian on Hard Talk and telling him that David Queen interfered in the internal affairs of this country, because while we were about to start a meeting to determine the future of this country in terms of conceding power and leadership, here was this slightly nosed little pusillanimous neighbor, the prosecutor, colonizing justice in Freetown, and he could have caused more deaths that day. Because if you remember, when Mr. Taylor was waiting in that park to see whether the Ghanaian authorities would have him arrested, there were tensions in the streets of Monrovia. People didn't know what was going to happen that day. We ensured, by negotiating with our African brothers and sisters, including the sober heads, Thabo Mbeki, Joaquin Tesino, John Kufuor, all of those people that were there, Dr. Chambers, that it was best to have Charles Taylor back in Monrovia than to be in handcuffs and taken to the Denver Road in Freetown. Because that would have been the end of any stability in Liberia, because it would have been a complete implosion. And the fact that we stopped that, I think I should get a top for that, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, we deserve that. We really deserve that. And while I was on BBC and CNN, I was going to Accra, sitting down with my adversaries, Kabila Jami, George Dwell, Ignatius Clay, Moses Jami, Joe Biden, and constructing a peace for the peace that we have today. And I knew up to the date that Taylor was going to leave. Okay? And every time you heard me on the air, all I said was to bring an interposition force to separate the warring sides so Taylor can make an exit. Remember the day that George Bush said, Taylor must leave, and Taylor must leave now? Do you remember that? Yeah. What was my response? If you can remember, the transcripts are there. I said, I thank President Bush for finally taking a keen interest in the situation of Liberia. Because with American military presence in Liberia, we would stop the marauding band to save lives, and Taylor would then make an exit. And Taylor did exactly that. And everything we told him happened. Everything that Eunice Brown, Sam Jackson, and the other negotiators told people, it happened. And we brought in Echo Mill, 800 men to this country. And when they were coming, people were cheering. Echo Mill is coming, Echo Mill is coming, everybody was happy. And I came back to Liberia on August 8, 2003. And on August 11, Mr. Taylor went, and the rest is history. But let me tell you how I am as a nationalist. When Mr. Taylor was literally hiding from, quote unquote, this colonizing American justice in Calabar in May of 2005, anticipating that a new government would come into power in 2006, it inherited this thing about whether Taylor should be sent to Freetown or not. I took upon myself by calling a press conference, forcing my friend to be the sacrificial lamb by agreeing to go to The Hague. And I never mentioned Freetown because I knew that the international community would have to make a special provision to try Mr. Taylor in a jurisdiction that was not near Sierra Leone or Liberia because of the fragility of the peace.